Hi, Phyllis here. I wanted to talk to you this morning about some of the foods from the 1950s. People my age usually don't do videos, so I thought it would be a good idea to maybe share with some of the younger people what we used to eat in the 1950s. Now, I'm going to tell my age because there's no way to do this without it. I was born in 1945, right after the war, so that would make me one of the oldest baby boomers. And the baby boomer age went from about 1945 to about 1955. Many people were born during this time after World War II. Okay, back to the food. The 1950s was a prosperous time. It was after the war, the men were home, and people were building houses. And in fact, my father built a house after the war. And anyway, he worked in the shipyard in Virginia, in Newport News, and we had a pretty good life. I guess we were considered middle income. He was a master welder, and he pretty much could get a job anywhere. So anyway, so the food that we had was pretty much like everybody else has. Just, when I would go visit my friends, they would have food similar to what we had. So I'm going to name a few of them. I've made some lists last night as I was thinking about it. One of the things that my mother made that none of us liked, but she made it anyway, and it was called cream chip beef. And it came in a little bitty bottle, a little bitty glass, really, and had a little lid on it. And it was dried beef, and it was extremely salty. And what they would do, or the directions on the bottle said you should soak it in water for a little while to get a lot of the salt out. Well, my mother just rinsed it. She didn't soak it. And then she would make this milk-type gravy and then put that beef in it, cut it up a little bit, and then we would eat it. That would be our meat for that meal. Of course, she'd serve lots of other vegetables too, but none of us, she must have liked it because she made it about maybe once every 2 weeks, but we didn't, none of us liked it. The other thing that we used to eat was fried treat. Now, of course, they still have treat today, but what she did was cut it up in slices, roll it in flour, and fry it. Now, the treat was okay, and we used to have it about once a week for supper. I guess it was okay. I liked it better than the cream chip beef, but it wasn't all that good. Another thing she fixed was salmon patties, and she would get this little can. They still make the same size can today, and put an egg in it and a little flour and squish it all up with her hands and fry the little patties out. And I really couldn't stand salmon patties, and to this day I do not like salmon patties. But anyway, we had them about once a week. And of course, back then the portions weren't as large as what we have now. So anyway, another thing, because we lived in Virginia, another thing we used to have frequently would be a Virginia ham or just a smoked ham, and she would put cloves in it, put it in the fat on the ham, and she would make a honey glaze for it. Now, you can buy honey glazed hams. I think we have honey glazed ham stores today, and they're good, but of course not as good as my mother made. And of course we had fried chicken. Now, none of us liked anything but the chicken breast. So Daddy just finally got tired of us not eating the leg or the thigh, so he just started getting all chicken breast, and that's what Mama fried. Usually on Sunday after church, that's what we had. We also had fried pork chops, and of course the thing that everybody used back then was fried fatback, and I loved it, and I still love it today. Very unhealthy for you, extremely unhealthy, but you really flavored green beans, cabbage, any kind of greens with your fatback grease. And they actually had little containers that you would sit on your stove to pour the grease in. It was terrible, but we did it, okay? And anyway, we also had a lot of cube steak. Now, my father didn't allow us to eat hot dogs. We didn't like that, and so when I went to my friend's house, If they were having hot dogs, I ate supper with them because I loved hot dogs. But he thought they were unhealthy and just wouldn't let us eat them. The other thing we had to do was drink milk at every meal. Every meal, because back then they thought children need 3 glasses of milk every day. So the only time we didn't have to drink milk was in the summertime. He would let us have iced tea for supper. Now, some of the things that were popular, some of the recipes, they would be on the back of the box of the ingredient, and the one I'm thinking about is the Comstock cornstarch. On the back of the box was a recipe for lemon meringue pie. My mother made those all the time. Another recipe that was very popular was the Nilla wafer box, had a banana pudding recipe on it. So we had that a lot. It was very good too. And of course the pineapple upside down cake was made frequently. Now, they did have cake mix back then, mostly Betty Crocker. We never used Mom always made the cakes from scratch, but we especially liked the pineapple upside down cake because she would make it in a cast iron skillet and put it in the oven. So anyway, another thing, and I was allowed to do this, which was really surprising. I think my father wanted me to learn to cook, so the thing I learned to cook was the Hershey's Cocoa Fudge. It took 3 cups of sugar and 2/3 a cup of cocoa. And Mother used to get so irritated with me because about once a week I would have to fix fudge. Anyway, another thing that came out in the 50s was the Pillsbury orange rolls. Now, those rolls are exactly today as I first remember them in the 1950s. And the first time I had orange rolls was when I was 10 years old. I remember it well, for breakfast the morning that my younger sister was born. Now, she's exactly 10 years younger than me, so she was born in 1955. And our next door neighbor, who was watching out for the 3 older children while Mother was in the hospital having my younger sister, and my dad was with her, and of course there was no one there to cook breakfast, so the neighbor brought over orange rolls, and they were delicious, and I've been eating them ever since. They were that good. Exactly the same recipe. Okay, so some of the beverages that a lot of people drank back then was Kool-Aid. Now, my dad didn't allow us to have Kool-Aid. When we had Kool-Aid, it was at one of our friends' house because he said it had way too much sugar in it. So I don't know if he was ahead of his time or what, but we weren't allowed to have Kool-Aid. We were also not allowed to have Pepsi or Coke. And all of us loved Pepsis and Cokes. The one exception for that would be when we went to my grandmother's house. She lived about 6 hours away. And the trip, with kids in the car, and they were thirsty and all that. So when we stopped, we would get a pack of nabs and maybe a Pepsi or a Coke. And then we would be on our way again a couple hours later. Of course, we'd have to stop and go to the restroom, and so then we would have to have another drink because we were thirsty. But that was the only time. We never had Cokes or Pepsi in the house at all. So one of my favorites back then was the Great Knee-High drink. They were very, very good. So anyway, and back to the desserts for a minute. Another thing that came out in the 50s was the Cool Whip in the little can, pressurized can. Oh, that was really nice. And so you could get frozen strawberries in the store in these little bitty cake-like cups. And what you did was thaw the strawberries out, put them on that little cup, and then squirt them with the Ready whipped cream. And so we never really had that except maybe on Sunday, maybe once a month, something like that. So my mother got a lot of her recipes out of magazines, and the magazines that we got then were Look, Life, Better Homes and Garden, and my husband reminded me last night another one was Collier's. So we got all of those magazines, and Mother would get recipes out of those magazines, and they were usually advertising some product, and she would get the product, and of course the recipe would be on the back of that product. And another thing that I remember very well was the Libby's canned pumpkin had the best recipe on the back of it for pumpkin pie. It's just delicious. You use a can of carnation cream, and of course the pumpkin and eggs and spices and all that. And that was something that was very popular, and that just changed everything about pumpkin pies because it was so creamy. But anyway, I'm going to make some of these 1950s desserts, and I'll videotape those for you. Now, I noticed that the recipe is no longer on the back of the vanilla wafers, but I do know the recipe by heart, so we'll be making that. We'll also be making the pineapple upside down cake. Now, sometimes now people make that cake with fresh pineapple, and that's great. But in the 1950s, we didn't have fresh pineapple. We only had the Dole canned pineapple. And so all the recipes called for that, and of course brown sugar and butter, and then the cake batter on top of it. So, you know, a lot of things have changed now, and we're just in a new time. And I want to go over one more thing, what we had for lunch, and you're going to find this pretty unbelievable. But in the summertime, of course, us children were home for lunch during the day, and my mother would serve 1 can of Campbell's vegetable soup, and she would split it between herself, me, my older sister, and my younger brother. 1 can of soup. And then, of course, we would have crackers. Once in a while, we'd have grilled cheese with that. But that was all, you know, it was plenty. And how in the world, we had little bowls, you know. I don't know how we did that, because now if I ate soup, I'd want at least half the can. But that's not the way she did it. But we also really had 4 meals a day. We would have breakfast and, of course, lunch. And our main meal of the day was always at 4:30, because that's when my father got home from work. And then about 8 o'clock at night, we all ate cereal. My father ate it, my mother, all of us would eat a big bowl of cereal with milk. Then we went to bed. Now, we had to go to bed at 9 o'clock, and I know that was terrible because we were teenagers, but Daddy said, oh no, you need your rest. So we were always in bed by 9 o'clock, and the only exception to that was on Saturday night when Gunsmoke came on. He would allow us to stay up and watch that. So anyway, the 50s were different, and they were a very innocent age, I thought. And of course, now you know my age, so I've seen some things in my lifetime, and I can tell you back then, we didn't have near the crime rate that we've got now. People weren't on drugs, and once in a while, you know, you'd have one of my friends' father might be an alcoholic, but he didn't, you know, get out in the street and rant and rave. And just things like that. And sometimes a teenage boy would steal somebody's car, those kind of little things. But you didn't hear, I mean, maybe bad things happened, but they didn't happen where we grew up. And I think we were a pretty good example of the overall population. Things were just much more innocent. And the food portions were much smaller in the 50s. We ate much, much less, but we ate more often. So anyway, I'm going to do some of those recipes, and I hope you'll enjoy them. And maybe we'll talk again about the 50s, because that's when Elvis Presley first came to be known by all of us teenage girls, and we loved him. And a lot of other things happened in the 50s. So we'll see you next time with maybe a few more stories. All right, bye for now.